says, my mentor died and I felt nothing. This is a moment to take very seriously if you are encountering this in your own religious or spiritual life. If the good book, if the Psalms, as Cliff was talking about to me earlier this morning, are not speaking to you anymore, if they are not singing to your soul, perhaps you need your faith to be revitalized. If you can't feel the beauty and the joy of your religious life, you may be right in that position now of what I call in my book, The Art of Pilgrimage, the longing. Goethe, the great German writer, once said in his great poem, The Holy Longing, "Tell a wise man about your crisis, or else keep silent, for the fool will mock you." Isn't that something? Sometimes it's very difficult to turn to a best friend, a spouse, a child, even your therapist, the local minister, and say, I'm in a spiritual crisis now, and I need to do something about it. What you're feeling is that sense of longing, and it's a longing for place. That's the beauty of this notion of pilgrimage, that there may be a sacred site somewhere out there in the world that will reaffirm your sense of self, your sense of the community. But you need to hearken to this feeling. One of the great expressions for this that I've encountered in my work is the very last painting that Paul Gauguin made. If you recall his story, he was actually an art dealer in Paris. And then he turned to painting himself, was fairly successful, but he became very upset with what he thought was the bourgeois and superficial world of art in Paris. And so he decided, like many of his generation in the 1890s in Paris and France in general, to go to the Pacific, because it was out there, out with all that beauty. As he put it, I went to Tahiti in search of a lullaby of color. Is that a wonderful phrase? There's an album title for you, Cliff. A lullaby of color. Isn't that something? There's a mixing there of elements. And this is what he was in search of, something to revitalize his life. And in his journals called Goa, anybody remember the name of it? Noa, which means fragrance in Tahiti. He went there in hopes that the beauty, that the essential, the basic nature of Tahitian life would revitalize him and his faith in the human race. And in the middle of this longing, this yearning, this openness of the heart comes what's called the call to adventure. This, I take the phrase, of course, from my great friend Joseph Campbell, who called this the first stage of the hero journey. There is no story if you have all the answers at home. Right? There's no book, there's no novel, there's no great conversation. The story begins when there's some yearning, some longing, some great questioning, deep, bona fide, earnest questioning going on. And in that spirit is where you hear the call. The call could come in a song. It could come in music. It might come in a novel. I remember being in Prague years ago and meeting someone in a cafe, and we just happened to say, why are you here? Why are you here? And she said, I read Milan Kundera's book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and it so moved my heart, I had to come here to Prague. Sometimes it's music. I've met people in Salzburg in Austria who were there just because they loved Mozart so deeply. I've met people back in Detroit from Europe who've gone to Detroit because they wanted to go to Motown's offices, right? Because their life was changed by Motown. I live in San Francisco in North Beach in the Italian neighborhood. City Lights Bookstore, one of the great bookstores in the world. And a few weeks ago, I met someone from the government in the new Czech Republic. And he said he was on pilgrimage there because when they were under the iron heel of Russia, under the Soviet Empire, they said one of the things that kept us going all those years was reading books that Lawrence Ferlinghetti published out of City Lights in San Francisco. He said it was a beacon of hope, a beacon of light. So I said I needed to make my pilgrimage to this bookstore and just thank Mr. Ferlinghetti who gave us all that light so we were ready for the revolution when we kicked the Soviets out. So you see, pilgrimage then is a sacred journey back to a place that you individually honor, your family, your tribe, your people honor in a way that might revitalize your life. And it does this in a mysterious way that is still baffling psychologists, theologians, philosophers of many kind. One clue that I've gotten about how and why this might work is from a Jungian psychologist named Edwin Edinger, who wrote a beautiful book on the underworld story of Moby Dick. He compares Moby Dick with Homer's Odyssey. And something that he said falls right in line with Campbell's model of the hero journey and my model of the pilgrim's journey, is that the journey that changes your life is not clockwise. The clockwise journey, tick, 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 goes the clock, like on my watch here, and if there's a clock somewhere here. That's the rhythm of everyday life. But all adventures, all stories, all transformation takes place when you go against the grain, when you go against the clock. That's why when you're on a great adventure, a bona fide pilgrimage, it's as if time stops. 2 weeks in Paris can seem like 2 years. 1 day in Jerusalem, am I not right, can feel like a lifetime. It's because you have deliberately gone against the grain and you have attempted to go to a sacred place, and while there you experienced sacred time. And you do this by going back and down to the source. This is probably the craziest photo I ever took in my life, leaning out like this over a cliff in Kilauea. This is a Kilauea lava flow. It's called Pele's Hair by the old Hawaiians. And the lava flow took place while I was walking across the hardened lava, and it broke through and started falling over the cliff. And I feel my tennis shoes are starting to burn, and I look down and they're smoking. My tennis shoes are smoking as I'm standing there, and my wife is yelling, "You crazy son, come back, come back." But I'm thinking, great photo op, right? So I'm doing this, I'm leaning back and I take the photo like this, because what it refers to and symbolizes is that there is tremendous fire at all these pilgrimage sites. There is the element of fire in spiritual language. There's the tongue on fire that gives you the words of the prophet, but also the fire that's lit in the human heart when you're in a place of great beauty, in a place that you admire, in a place that is going to ignite you. This is Delphi in Greece. You see a group of kids there. I led 22 16-year-olds in the footsteps of St. John and St. Paul a few years ago, with my 12-year-old son as my assistant, my guide. And we were following in the footsteps of the great Christian writers, but also in the footsteps of Homer. And when we went to Delphi, I had asked them actually to come to Greece with a question, the deepest question in their life. And every one of these kids took that exhortation seriously. They brought the most beautiful, profound questions. Does God really exist? Do my parents really love me? These were profound, profound questions. And I asked each of them, as you see here, we're walking to the Temple of Apollo, where the oracle sat for 2,500 years, taking the questions from pilgrims of all kinds, from farmers to emperors to soldiers. And one by one, each of these 22 kids asked their questions at the oracle. And then the next day, we teased all of those answers and the responses that they heard from God at that site. And this is the notion then, what sets the pilgrimage apart from a Club Med trip. Club Med does not ask you to bring a profound question to Mexico, right? They say just bring a lot of cash and a few traveler's checks, right? But the question, the deep question, is what separates this kind of travel from others. You're going with a question, you're humble enough to say, guess what, I don't have all the answers at home. My answers have dried up, and that's why I need to feel and express my humility. So a few more images here, and then we'll turn to these wonderful musicians to riff on some of these images, right? So there, just to give you a sense of the wide, wide swath of possible pilgrimages, it's really pretty amazing, the variety.